Greetings everyone, welcome to another video. Today what I'd like to talk about is the topic, perhaps not so fashionable topic, of repetition. And specifically what I'd like to talk about in relation to repetition is why, in terms of our yoga practice, repetition is beneficial, helpful, and in fact, in many ways, it is an essential ingredient in terms of developing our practice and the results of the practice over a long time. Now, the reason that I thought that this was an important topic is because we have to be very, very careful in terms of understanding what correct yoga is in terms of the way that it's been propagated over the millennia. Now, that doesn't mean that we can't make adaptations to suit the modern world, but at the core of yoga lies some very foundational principles which are unaffected by time and hold true today as much as they held true thousands of years ago. And I say this in particular relation to a cultural behavior that has been sweeping through the world now for many, many years, which is essentially the need for us, or the apparent need, I should say, for us to feel like we constantly need to do different things, to give ourselves different experiences. Now, many of us may be saying, well, what's wrong with that? And I'm not here to say that there is anything wrong with that. But what I am here to try to explain as best I can is that this ongoing desire for new and different and variated experiences actually is not necessarily what we are looking for in our yoga practice. You see, one way, not always, but one way of looking at a constant, unending, restless search for new experiences is, if we look at this at a deep level, is that in some way, at some level, we are dissatisfied. We are dissatisfied with what? We are just dissatisfied with just being or being present in the moment. For whatever reason, we find it difficult to sit still, to place our mind on one object or in one direction, and just to be content and satisfied by doing very little and just being. And as a result of this very human predicament, we tend to look outwards for stimulation and experiences which are enjoyable to the senses and which perhaps distract us from that innate sense of, or at least that mind felt sense of dissatisfaction with our current circumstances or our current situation. Now, because that is the nature of the environment that we are living in, it's very easy for that behavior to be conflated with and then incorporated into the way in which we are taught and the way in which we receive yoga practices. What that is to say is that, therefore, as teachers, potentially, there is always the desire or the temptation to think that we as teachers must offer a variable experience in studios or in classes, because we know that that is the kind of mindset that people are in, which is that they come to class seeking something new and seeking a new experience. However, unfortunately, if that experience is one which is always changing and where we're trying to serve up new positions and new postures, and as students as well, we are always feeling that we want to try a new posture or try a new breathing technique or try a longer meditation or whatever it might be, or try a new mantra or try a new chant, what we can end up doing is just skipping over the surface of numerous practices and never necessarily diving deep into one area of practice so that we can move towards at least a degree of mastery in that particular area. So one kind of famous saying is that in order to dig for water, rather than digging lots of shallow holes, you should just choose one spot and dig deep. And I think that there's no more appropriate analogy for how we should practice yoga. So rather than necessarily like shopping around for different types of yoga, different teachers, different methodologies, different schools, different lineages, of course there can be some of that. We need to kind of get a sense of what resonates with us. But at some point it's beneficial from the yogic perspective to say, right, this is what I'm going to practice. And I'm going to try to do my best to kind of maintain and sustain my practice in this direction for a long period of time. And similarly, with individual asanas or sequences or techniques, it's important to realize that actually we can spend years just on a very, very limited set of asanas and still not necessarily master them completely. Now, I've not been practicing yoga for that long, but in the 8 or 9 years that I've been practicing, there are some postures that I still do every day, and I'm still exploring them, and I'm still finding new spaces in those postures, and I'm finding new ways of coming into them, and I'm finding new ways of finding steadiness and comfort and ease in those postures. I'm finding better ways of breathing in those postures, and that's as a result of coming back to something every single day and not being frightened of this idea of repetition. Because you see, when we start to repeat something with intention on a regular basis, we begin to move towards mastering that which we are repeating. But almost more importantly than that, what it means from the perspective of the mind is that we are bringing our mind back to the same place every single day. We are choosing that point of focus, and we are trying to connect or to harness the mind into that object or into that posture or into that breath. And what that does gradually, as I've talked about in other videos, is it creates a pattern in the mind of stability and of focus. And it is only through those patterns of stability and focus that gradually we begin to bring the mind under control. And therefore, at a deeper level, we begin to make real transformational progress in terms of the way our mind is set up to perceive and to experience the world, and thus move closer towards the goal of peace in our practice and in our lives. So in order to do this, repetition is super important. And that is why, for example, when we take on a mantra practice, it's often recommended that we work with this mantra for a lifetime. It's not that we need to change the mantra every couple of weeks and try something new. Yes, of course, it's okay to experiment outside of that mantra, but as our one mantra that we use for regular practice, we continue to develop day after day that regularity of connection, feeling into the mantra, feeling into the resonance, feeling into the vibration, visualizing the meaning, and creating a stronger home in our hearts for that connection to the practice. And you see, coming back to what I said at the beginning, if we can just imagine for a moment or feel that one of the reasons why we enable our minds to continually be on the search for distraction is because all of us, to certain degrees, have suppressed or have tried to avert from or turn away from some of the challenges that we faced in our lives that have left a residue in our subconscious, in our minds, and in our bodies. And when we come to be still, or when we come to some kind of repetitive practice, it's all too easy for those things to come out of the box and to spill out and to affect the way we feel, not often in a way that we might call positive. And so therefore, the other benefit of learning to sit still or learning to practice and doing something repetitive over a period of time is we begin to develop the strength of heart and perhaps the courage to be able to experience and to sit with some of these difficulties and allow awareness to kind of penetrate them and air them out and allow them to move through us. Without the power of awareness, these energies become stuck inside us, and we're going to constantly be stuck in that pattern of feeling that discomfort rising. We might call it boredom or dissatisfaction, and then needing to go and do something else, watch a film, have some ice cream, go and travel, whatever it might be. Now, just to reiterate, none of these things in and of themselves are bad. It is just the reason why we do them, or the relationship that we have with them, as to whether they become compulsive and whether actually they are distracting us from the work of healing and coming into the heart space and opening ourselves with courage and compassion to what we may have experienced in our lives that causes us discomfort, or whether we are compulsively drawn to run away from that. And unfortunately, when we are compulsively drawn away from those feelings and from sitting with them and from being with them, we're never going to be able to let them go. So, one aspect to this process of healing is developing the ability and the comfort to repeat our practices over and over again. Of course, gradually we adapt them and gradually we develop them. But you can see that this sits in direct, perhaps, antithesis to the culture which we tend to be surrounded by now, which is a new phone every year, a new car every couple of years, new clothes, new this, new that, all because of this keying into our human predicament of constantly wanting change. And so by practicing repetition in some of our own practices and on the mat and in various other ways, we can begin to anchor into ourselves and be less drawn into or magnetized by the promise of all of these things, which ultimately are nothing in comparison to the peace that we can experience within. So thank you for joining me once again, and I hope to see you again soon. Namaste.